Venezuela is a country situated in the northwestern portion of South America. To the untrained eye, it might appear as an unassuming country with pretty views, a vibrant culture, but not much in the way of the modern luxuries. However, if you were to take a closer look into the history of this country, really look close, you'd spot an encroaching hidden danger, a phantom menace.
Police fired tear gas at demonstrators in Caracas on Tuesday.
It's being called the mother of all marches. Anti-government protests met with force by the police, civilian militias, and supporters of President Maduro. Even opposition leader Enrique
Before the 20th century, Venezuela was a Spanish colony, exporting agricultural goods such as coffee and cocoa. The rarity and value of these items at the time quickly made Venezuela one of the most profitable Spanish colonies. However, despite the profitability of Venezuela's trade for the Spanish, the familiar damages of colonialism had already been done. These included low levels of industrialization, an extremely unequal class structure, with the few elite controlling the land, and finally, small, rural, displaced populations.
As was often the case with colonies, Venezuela was a poor, underdeveloped, rural country dominated for its potential in exports for the Spanish. This, however, would not be the case for long.
Come the dawn of the 1900s, Venezuela had been free from Spanish rule for nearly 300 years, but this freedom had not come without its struggles. Venezuela for a long time struggled with political turmoil, with a constant struggle for brief and violent leadership. Soon, things were going to change.
In the very first years of the 1900s, dictator Juan Vicente Gómez came to power after a successful coup. He knew that Venezuela had oil, but could never have imagined how much. In 1908, Gómez opened up Venezuela's oil sector to foreign companies like Shell, Standard Oil, and Gulf. Not long after, oil surpassed coffee as Venezuela's main export.
Despite Gómez's brutal authoritarian rule, he used the oil sales profits to modernize Venezuelan infrastructure, buildings, roads, and ports. Whilst more infrastructure is definitely the right step to development, the benefits of this new oil infrastructure was felt mostly by foreign oil companies, by the elite in Caracas, the country's capital, and of course, the political leadership who enjoyed bribes and embezzlement. The average Venezuelan still remained poor, with an average GDP per capita of just $1,700 in the 1910s. But this was just the start of Venezuela's path to becoming the largest oil exporter in the world. By 1928, Venezuela was producing 300,000 barrels of oil per day. Fast forward just 70 years, and oil production had ballooned to 3 million barrels of oil a day. Before continuing the story of Venezuela's development, it is important to introduce the concept of a petrostate. At its core, a petrostate is what its name tells you, a state where petroleum and natural gas are the key income generators for a state. Petrostates like Nigeria, Oman, and Qatar are deeply reliant on the export of oil and natural gas to fund their governments. Generally speaking, these petrostates have weak political institutions with widespread corruption, with the power in the hands of a few elites. Whilst oil can literally raise a state out of poverty and develop cities in the middle of deserts, Dubai, pure petrostates are susceptible to the so-called Dutch disease, and are extremely vulnerable to fluctuations in the oil market. This is going to be very relevant to our story. Another common symptom of the Dutch disease is a shift in a state's labor. Often, labor and money are sucked into the fossil fuel markets, leaving agricultural and manufacturing sectors understaffed and underdeveloped. The combination of these factors alongside corrupt leadership sets the stage for potential dramatic collapse. Once dictator Gomez died, new legislation was put in place to combat the 98% control that foreign oil companies had over Venezuela's oil markets. The Hydrocarbons Law of 1943 instituted a 50% profit on oil trade from foreign companies to the Venezuelan state. This decision alone multiplied the governmental income by a factor of 6 in 5 years. Venezuela then continued nationalizing their oil, making foreign oil companies pay 60% of profits to the government. Venezuela also joined OPEC in 1960, hoping that coordination with other oil exporting countries would allow for greater state control on their oil markets. And for a time, it seemed that all their efforts were paying off, with Venezuela having the highest per capita income in all of Latin America. $10 billion in profits were allocated to the state, but of course, not everything was perfect. Of this $10 billion, an estimated $100 million were embezzled in a span of 25 years, and this was just the start of their problems. Come the early 1980s, a surplus of oil production led to a reduced demand in oil, which later became known as the oil glut of the 1980s. Across the world, oil prices fell, and for petrostates like Venezuela, which relied on oil prices, this was very bad news. The Venezuelan economy popped, with skyrocketing rates of inflation, high levels of unemployment, and extreme social discontent. This had much to do with deficits and expected growth falling to the side, whilst the governmental allocation of oil funds was abused. This downward trend continued throughout the 2000s, with record hyperinflation of over 130,000% in 2018. In a brief period of just 7 years, from 2014 to 2021, the Venezuelan GDP shrank by 3/4.
Significant emigration also took place throughout Venezuela's economic freefall, with an estimated 8 million fleeing since Maduro's rule beginning in 2014, and a record high poverty rate of 96% of the population, with nearly 80% living in extreme poverty.
Generally, democracy is the key which is agreed upon as a right of way towards development in modern societies. This is because of international relations, trade, and the general benefits of globalization. The issue with Venezuela's route along this path is that it has never been so straightforward. Beginning with an insurgent militant group's coup, Venezuela's era of rich resources was set to sink rather than sail. The leader of this coup, hailing from Caracas, is a man known as El Comandante, Hugo Chavez. He later became the president of Venezuela, ruling for 14 years. His reign was only impeded by his death. Many considered his later years of power as curbing the edge of democracy or even outright rigged. What is less disputed is the undemocratic nature of his successor, Maduro. So what can Venezuela do? The short answer is that they still have immense potential. They still have the largest amount of oil reserves globally. The issue is that it would be ignorant to not mention the climate and environment when considering this resource. If we are to set aside Venezuela's oil, they have a grandiose landmass with many other resources and biodiversity, which can be transformed into positive sources of income. A great example of this is Costa Rica's green energy and ecotourism. Venezuela has dormant powers over their situation. With this comes hope, but with guided help and effort, they could create a prosperous, thriving economy. Some might even call this opportunity a new hope.